From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I am Estefania Bravo. This is From the South. The armed forces have rejected U.S. President Donald Trump's call for the army to abandon President Nicolas Maduro. The Minister of Defense Vladimir Padrino Lopez said Trump's speech was arrogant and that it promoted terrorism. He said the armed forces recognize only one commander-in-chief, President Maduro. Padrino Lopez said it's outrageous that Trump thinks he can give orders to the Venezuelan soldiers and accused them of turning against their people. He also rejected Colombia's president for following Trump.
The Bolivarian armed forces will never accept any orders from a government or foreign power, or any authority that doesn't come from the sovereign decision of the people. We will stand along the borders, as called by our commander-in-chief, to avoid any violation to the integrity of our territory. Threats, blackmail, and coercion won't break our unity and moral strength, because we are not mercenaries who can be bought by the highest bidder. We are the heirs of Bolivar, Zamora, and Chavez, and faithful to their principles, we will defend the most sacred interests of the Venezuelan people, their liberty, their sovereignty, and independence.
The defense minister's statements come after Trump threatened the Bolivarian armed forces during Monday's speech at the Florida International University.
We seek a peaceful transition of power, but all options are open. We want to restore Venezuelan democracy, and we believe that the Venezuelan military and its leadership have a vital role to play in this process. If you choose this path, you have the opportunity to help forge a safe and prosperous future for all of the people of Venezuela. Or you can choose the second path, continuing to support Maduro.
The editor of the Gray Zone, Max Blumenthal, joined us from our Caracas studio with his reaction to Trump's speech.
Well, this is the second call that Donald Trump has made to the Venezuelan military, calling on them to turn their backs on the elected president, Nicolas Maduro. And the last call, which was made on January 22nd, was not heeded by the military. Only 2 out of something like 2,000 officers actually defected. So basically the coup has completely failed to this point, and Trump reiterating his call shows how desperate the forces in Washington have become as the reality show coup fails in plan A and they realize they have no plan B. They're making it up as they go along. And I thought it was really ironic that when the right-wing Venezuelan exiles were waiting for Trump's speech in their red MAGA hats, they were listening to the soundtrack of the Rolling Stones, Time Is on My Side, because time really is not on the Trump administration's side here, and desperation is beginning to set in Washington.
And yeah, Parampil, also of the Gray Zone, shared her experience in Venezuela.
How it had been for us in Chacao, which is the more wealthy district here in Caracas, the financial district, if you will. And I said that it was a lot like our experience in the States because we could go into the store and buy whatever we want. And he actually said he was surprised to hear that because just a few weeks ago, there was a problem with shortages in many of the grocery stores, even in those neighborhoods, but that perhaps because the Trump administration has made this move, put Juan Guaido in charge of the interim presidency, that the private sector here actually decided to let some things flow back into the market and try and push Venezuelans into supporting this change by saying, look how great life can be for you if you go along with this. Maybe we'll, stop holding on to some of these goods we've been hoarding for so long.
And President Maduro is questioning Trump's sudden concern for the Venezuelan people. Speaking at the Scientific Council in Caracas, Maduro said the U.S. is working to sabotage progress in the country.
Suddenly, Donald Trump woke up, and he woke up with a big love for Venezuela, and he wants to help Venezuela. When did he ever wanted to help somebody in his life? Can somebody understand? Can you really believe that he loves Venezuela? What does he love about Venezuela? The oil, the gold, diamonds, gas, his eyes go round and big. The worst part is that people in Venezuela are puppeteers of his government that are serving the empire and take off their masks and they call for invasions.
And Venezuela's foreign ministry has denounced the threats from the U.S. In a public statement, Venezuela has asked the international community to stop Trump from interfering in Venezuela. The Bolivarian government says the U.S. is violating the United Nations Charter and international law. Meanwhile, there have been more demonstrations in support of President Nicolas Maduro. Residents in the state of Mérida gathered to reject the U.S. intervention attempts. Protesters say they will defend the peace and sovereignty of their country. The president of the National Constituent Assembly, Diosdado Cabello, joined the demonstration.
Why they attack Nicolas Maduro? Because he loves the motherland. They want a comfortable president. But I'm going to say to all the opposition that on May 20, this motherland came out. Who did they vote for? For Nicolas Maduro Moros, and our vote cares.
And Cuba's President Miguel Díaz-Canel has shown his support for Venezuela on Twitter. Díaz-Canel denounced the attacks by the U.S. against the Latin American people and tweeted, "Hands off Venezuela." Hundreds of people in Argentina also gathered outside the U.S. Embassy in Buenos Aires to support the Bolivarian country. Social organizations said they gathered to reject imperialism and to support President Nicolas Maduro.
High-ranking U.S. officials remind us every day with arrogance and audacity that when it comes to Venezuela, all options are on the table, including military. People will severely judge any new imperialist military intervention in the region and the complicity of those who irresponsibly go along with it.
Venezuela's Minister of Communication, Jorge Rodriguez, has announced a concert for peace will be held on the border with Colombia. The event will take place on February 22nd and 23rd.
On February 22 and 23 will be held the immense concert and the International Bridge Simón Bolívar on the Venezuelan side. It will be a message for life and for peace to the whole world. There are many artists who have asked us to participate with their voice, songs and poetry dedicated to all during 2 days for that immense concert that will be held at the International Bridge Simón Bolívar at the Venezuelan border with Colombia.
English songwriter and Pink Floyd co-founder Roger Waters has slammed Richard Branson's so-called Venezuela Aid concert as part of the scheme to push for regime change in Venezuela.
I've just seen a video clip of Branson with his bleeding heart worn openly upon his Virgin Airways t-shirt. The important thing about this is that even if you listen to their shtick, it has nothing to do with humanitarian aid at all. It has to do with Richard Branson, and I'm not surprised by this, having bought the US saying, we have decided to take over Venezuela for whatever our reasons may be, but it has nothing to do with the needs of the Venezuelan people. It has nothing to do with democracy. It has nothing to do with freedom, and it has nothing to do with aid. Because it's very easy to be led down a garden path that ends in regime change. Do we really want Venezuela to turn into another Iraq or Syria or Libya? I don't, and neither do the Venezuelan people.
A coalition of 16 U.S. states has sued President Donald Trump over his plan to use emergency powers to unlock funding for the construction of a border wall with Mexico. The lawsuit argues that Trump does not have the power to divert funds for building the wall because Congress controls spending. Hundreds of people gathered outside the White House to protest against President Trump's national emergency. Protesters say the U.S. administration is promoting racism and discrimination.
There is no emergency. Honestly, the only emergency that we're experiencing right now is the one that immigrant families are living throughout this country every day with raids, families that have been separated at the border, this wall that's going to just militarize our southern border and just create more harm than good.
That emergency, there's no emergency. It's a fake emergency. As a vet, I think it's uncalled for that he's calling people to the borders. There's no emergency at the border. The emergency is right over there at the White House with that man in office, with his bigotry, his racism, and his hatred towards people in this country.
Last week, Code Pink, a social justice movement, protested during a hearing on the Venezuelan situation at the U.S. Congress. Activists interrupted the special envoy to Venezuela, Elliot Abrams, while he was speaking, calling him a war criminal. They pointed to his long history of supporting intervention and the tragic consequences of it.
The chair will remind all persons in the audience.
To talk more about this, we are joined live by the Code Pink activist Carolyn Debnam, who was at the hearing. Hello, Carolyn. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell us what led you to make a stand at the hearing with Elliot Abrams on the political situation in Venezuela?
Well, as an anti-war activist, I try to pay close attention to possible conflicts, and especially the role that my government plays in them. Elliot Abrams is a notorious figure and has been responsible or complicit in some of the worst crimes that Latin America has seen in the last century. So when I saw that the Trump administration was appointing him, I feared that what he had in mind for Venezuela would be similar to what he's done in El Salvador, Nicaragua, Guatemala. He has no business running foreign policy or briefing Congress on anything, considering he's a convicted liar and he should be a convicted war criminal. So we thought that someone needed to be there to say something in case a representative didn't.
Now, Caroline, your organization has said that opposition figure Juan Guaido's claims to presidency is illegal and could lead to a civil war. What do you think about the role the U.S. has played in this situation?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, the United States was the first international power to recognize the opposition figure Guaido as president. And then our allies followed suit after. But no foreign actor has the power to determine the legitimate leader of another country. And the Trump administration isn't even being dishonest about its intentions here, which is taking control of the oil. So if the U.S. actually did care about promoting democracy and human rights, it would be lifting the sanctions, wouldn't be withholding those assets from Venezuela and Venezuelans, and would be supporting negotiations for a peaceful resolution and not pushing for a coup, which could easily lead to a civil war or a military intervention.
Now, Carolyn, one last question for you. As an activist and U.S. citizen, can you tell us about the general feeling of the public on Venezuela, and what do you think they think what their government is doing?
I think that the U.S. has been using the troubles plaguing Venezuela as an example of the so-called ills of socialism for a while, especially now that socialism is becoming more and more popular. Frankly, it serves U.S. propaganda efforts to make an enemy out of Venezuela by calling it a socialist state. So the discourse can then be manipulated into this false dichotomy that if you oppose U.S. intervention in Venezuela, you're supporting an evil socialist dictator. But we've seen what happens in other countries that the U.S. intervenes in, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and how well are they doing now? I think that this isn't about ideology. It's about promoting U.S. interests, and the public needs to be more aware and critical of the U.S.'s role in that.
Carolyn, we thank you so much for your time for Telesur English.
Yeah, thank you.
We have been speaking with Carolyn Debnam. She is a Code Pink activist. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us.
We are present at every event where our nations are staring. We believe in a new global vision, united in every broadcasting. We keep expanding our horizons and working on a closer and better communication. Now, in Grenada, Telesur, the news source from South America and the Caribbean.
Welcome back. The cabinet chief of Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has been fired, suspected of improper campaign financing. Gustavo Bebiano had been Bolsonaro's campaign chief for last year's election. He was sacked after days of turmoil within the ruling PSL party. This followed revelations by the Folha de São Paulo that the party had used fake candidates to acquire extra public funding. Last weekend, Bolsonaro's son accused Bebiano of lying.
His Excellency, the President of the Republic, Jair Messias Bolsonaro, has decided to dismiss, as of today, Gustavo Bebiano as Minister of the General Secretariat of the Presidency.
Relatives of the victims of a pipeline explosion in Mexico are waiting for the government to identify the remains of their loved ones a month after the disaster. On January 18th, fuel thieves punctured the pipeline a few miles from one of Mexico's main refineries. Up to 800 people flocked the pipeline to fill plastic containers, but a couple of hours later it erupted in flames in a powerful explosion. The government is yet to return the remains of many victims. Many are still looking for their missing relatives. An irrigation canal has burst in northern Peru as heavy rains continue to flood the region. Market traders in the town of Aguas Verdes were trying to save what remained of their stalls after overnight floodings swept away most of it. At least 39 people have been killed and more than 8,000 have been affected by the latest series of mudslides and floodings across the country. The government has declared a state of emergency in the most affected areas. As Ecuadorian President Lenín Moreno continues privatizing, key public sector workers are taking to the streets in protest.
Ecuadorian Councilor Santiago Cuesta reaffirmed the government's positions on privatizing public companies such as the National Corporation of Communication. According to Cuesta, the decision was made after irregularities inside the company came to light. He added that the workers that resist changes will face sanctions.
He tried to say that sanctions will come if workers leave their post and go out to protest while they are working. And we have workers who have been removed from their post because they left work.
Meanwhile, the majority of labor unions have taken to the streets against the recent economic policies imposed by President Moreno. They condemn massive layoffs, talks with the IMF, and fuel prices hikes. They describe the recent massive demonstration against the government as positive, despite Cuesta's threats of being fired.
People are beginning to realize that a state-backed purge is coming despite all our hard work over these years. Now we are in danger of losing everything. We know that privatization will bring losses.
The government is set on the path of neoliberalism as a way to improve the country's economy. But affected workers say they will remain steadfast in their resistance and will continue taking to the streets until Moreno prioritizes workers' rights. Denise Herrera, Telesur, Ecuador.
A court in Argentina has revoked the acquittal of social leader Milagro Sala in a case of alleged phone threats to the police in 2014. That means the 3-year sentence Sala received before the acquittal has been reinstated. The judge's ruling comes after an appeal filed by the prosecutor's office in December 2017. The president of Argentina's Mothers of the Plaza de Mayo says judicial officials have stolen a van containing papers from a documentary archive. Eve de Bonafini is worried the documents may be burned, so she has asked the public to help her get the van back. She says the archive has no commercial or economic value. Officials say the seizure of materials is related to the foundation's bankruptcy. A massive fire at a landfill in Barbados is raising health worries among hundreds of residents. The fire has engulfed a section of the state-owned dump where old tires are discarded. Dangerous fumes have spread throughout the parish of St. Thomas. Efforts are continuing to extinguish the blaze, which is one of the largest in the country in recent years. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us.
We have been present in all the events stirring our peoples. United for each transmission and in tune we bet on a new Latin American vision. Now we are also accompanied by the Caribbean people of St. Kitts and Nevis. Each day working for the best understanding and communication. Tell us more. The news source from South America and the Caribbean.
Welcome back. U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders says he is running for the Democratic Party's presidential nomination in 2020. Sanders mounted a fierce challenge to frontrunner Hillary Clinton back in 2016. The 77-year-old released a video on Tuesday pledging to build a large grassroots movement to confront these special interests.
Our campaign is not only about defeating Donald Trump, the most dangerous president in modern American history. It is not only about winning the Democratic nomination and the general election. Our campaign is about transforming our country and creating a government based on the principles of economic, social, racial, and environmental justice. Our campaign is about taking on the powerful special interests that dominate our economic and political life.
The Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has slammed Facebook for blocking In the Now, a page run by RT.
Regarding Facebook, as prompted by CNN, which in turn was prompted by the U.S. Marshall Fund, blocking the In the Now page, one of RT's projects, I believe that this is definitely another example of pressure on the Russian media, on freedom of speech, and this is regrettable. We discussed the situation. I drew the attention of my colleagues to this during negotiations. I cited other examples where RT and Sputnik are exposed to overt discrimination, including being prevented from attending a number of official events in France.
Facebook suspended all the pages run by Mafic Media following a CNN report about the company's ties to the Kremlin. That report was pushed by think tanks funded by the U.S. government. Lavrov said there will likely not be reciprocal actions because he is against measures that censor the media. Authorities in Egypt are investigating a blast in Cairo that left at least 2 police officers dead and injured 3 more. The blast occurred as police officers were pursuing a man they believed was responsible for planting a bomb in front of a Cairo mosque last Friday. He reportedly detonated an explosive device he had on him when police officers closed in on him. The African Energy Indaba, or conference, is now underway in Sandton, South Africa. Government officials from the continent, private players, and non-governmental organizations are in attendance. Key issues to be discussed include how African countries can utilize renewable energy for sustainable development and to combat global warming. Senegal's President Macky Sall is the strong favorite to win this Sunday's election. He is facing 4 contenders in the first round of voting after 2 of Senegal's best-known opposition figures were ruled out because of corruption convictions. Right groups say this represents a crackdown on dissident. Many voters and foreign backers applaud Sall for boosting economic growth. But students are frustrated and hope the new government will improve Senegal's education system.
Education, being a student, is fundamental for a country, and the development of a country and Senegal's education system suffers because the students are guided towards the private sector. They are suffering. The state needs to review its policy on education.
India's most senior military official in the region of Kashmir has claimed that Pakistan's intelligence agency played a role in last week's deadly attack on a security convoy. The military official told journalists that the leaders behind the attack were being tracked and that the attack was planned on the Pakistan side of the border.
The complete attack on the convoy was masterminded by Pakistan and the ISI and the JEM from across the border. What happened from the local content is a matter of investigation. So we have the leads, we are working on them.
However, Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan called the accusation baseless and said his country is ready to cooperate with investigations.
Today, I make this offer to the Indian government. Whatever investigations you want to carry out in this connection, to find out if there was any Pakistan involvement in it, we are ready to help. If you have any actionable intelligence of Pakistan involvement, give it to us. I guarantee that we'll take action. Not because there's any pressure on us, but because if anyone is using Pakistan soil for such activities, they are harming Pakistan. It is enmity with Pakistan. It is against our interests.
And finally, a small restaurant in a quiet fishing village on the outside of Cape Town has been named the best restaurant in the world for 2019. Wolfgat took the honor at the inaugural World Restaurant Awards in Paris. Wolfgat is committed to using indigenous ingredients to create a unique menu. And with only 6 staff members, who are mostly female, the restaurant has already made a name for itself since opening only 2 years ago. And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And for our viewers in Africa, remember you can find us on StarSat, channel 461 in South Africa, and channel 539 in Nigeria. We're on social media as well, on Facebook, on Twitter.